tonight.
¡Viva la revolución! ¡Viva! ¡Sí por Cuba!
Tonight, a CNN special presentation. Cuba, 38 years after the revolution.
Hello, I'm Lucia Newman at the Plaza of the Revolution in Havana, the symbolic site of some of Cuba's largest rallies. The ruling Communist Party has just started its 5th Party Congress, a major political event in this country. Hundreds of party delegates must put forward a 5-year plan for Cuba's future, its economy, its society, its revolution. A revolution which, by its leaders' own admission, is facing unprecedented challenges. More than ever, the people of Cuba will be looking for solutions to their daily struggles and for evidence of a better future. In the next half hour, we'll examine today's Cuba. From Camagüey, CNN's Larry Woods provides a look at how the revolution has fared in the countryside. In Miami, CNN's John Zarella shows us an entirely different view from Cubans living on the other side of the Florida Straits. But first, to understand today's Cuba, one needs to understand two men, Fidel Castro and Ernesto Che Guevara. Three decades after his departure, the remains of Ernesto Che Guevara have returned to the country that made him a legendary revolutionary.
Today we receive the remains, not in defeat, but as a hero, eternally valiant, strong, and daring.
Standing by solemnly, his old comrade in arms, President Fidel Castro. It was idealism and fate that led the young Argentine doctor, Che Guevara, to join forces with the Cuban Castro, who had already made a name for himself as a rebel. The bullet holes are still intact on these walls in Santiago de Cuba. They're a reminder of where it all began on July 26, 1953, when Fidel Castro first led a group of armed rebels in an attack against the Moncada barracks. It would take another 6 years, but eventually Castro triumphed and overthrew the Batista dictatorship to start a revolution which was both applauded and despised around the world. But a revolution which, like Castro himself, has left few indifferent. A revolution in which Che Guevara, too, played a vital role. First as a guerrilla commander, then as the new Cuba's economic strategist. Like Castro, he was widely recognized for his charisma. Photographer Alberto Corda took perhaps the most famous picture of Che during those early years. While Guevara was as anti-imperialist as Castro, he developed a serious distrust of the Soviet model that Cuba was following.
One of the first leaders of the revolution to visit the Soviet bloc was Che, and on a stopover in Algeria on his way back, he made a speech that was never published in Cuba. In fact, I think the Soviet Union protested to the government. He said that the Soviet bloc was condemned as a dead end.
Che soon became restless and began dreaming of other revolutions still to be won.
When Che first agreed to join the Cuban struggle, he told Fidel that if the Cuban Revolution triumphed, he wanted to be freed of all commitments in order to continue the fight in other parts of Latin America, especially in the southern cone towards Argentina.
Although he had a Cuban wife and 4 children, he left Cuba without a word in 1965 in a futile attempt to spread his revolution. He was captured and executed by the Bolivian army in October 1967, leaving Fidel Castro alone. More than 30 years of confronting the fury of the United States and of struggling to survive without the help of the Soviet Union have taken their toll on the aging Castro. His speeches are not as long and fiery as they once were. His powerful communist allies are now long gone, yet he manages to survive.
He has managed to stay in power
through a delicate balance of cunning, charismatic leadership, and extraordinary state power, always managing to stay basically ahead of the curve.
Unlike Che, the eternally young and romantic revolutionary, Castro has had to live on, to take responsibility for the failures of the Cuban Revolution, not just its ideals. The remains of the legendary Che Guevara will be put on display right here in the Plaza of the Revolution this weekend, part of a week-long memorial designed to keep his dreams alive. And how are his dreams faring? For part of the answer, CNN's Larry Woods visited Cuba's heartland. Later in the program, we'll tell you what he discovered in Camagüey.
60-year-old Philadelphio Alfonso and his wife Clara, who manage a goat farm, represent a work ethic they say comes from a long devotion to Che and Fidel and everything revolutionary.
He will guide us, as always, for the correct road to take. He will tell us, as always, how to go on.
The lighter side of clustered computing.
Yes, sir. Slide the card. Do you have any idea how complex the technology is behind this transaction? Information moves. It's non-stop. Non-stop like a jumbo jet. So how does information technology reach the ultimate state of non-stopness? Is that a word? It's the cluster. The cluster is the computer. A cluster means you've got multiple CPUs, all connected by a crisscrossing network. Talk about stability and scalability. But just bigger gulps doesn't get you everything you need, such as reliability and availability. Do it this way, and it never stops. The contents are always available. Non-stop and scalability. Why would you even think of using anything less for critical analysis of market data or doing commerce on the net? I bet you're wondering what company makes software non-stop.
Well, actually, I just like a bag for this.
The cluster is the computer.
Helping people experience the joy and fulfillment of reading is very important to me. Start early. Get your child interested in reading through newspapers, magazines, and books. Read to your children. Encourage them to read every day by themselves. Reading is the most precious gift you can give them. They'll love you for it.
Encourage your child to read every day.
To you, it looks like this. To a car thief, it looks like this.
And to our Ford Motor Company engineers, it looks like one of the most powerful anti-theft devices ever.
Only this key sends an electronic code to the engine before it will ever start. So it looks like your new Mercury Sable will be just where you parked it. Ford, quality is job one.
Welcome back to Havana, once considered one of the most beautiful cities in the world. Today, much of it is crumbling, due in part to neglect, but also to Cuba's acute economic crisis. And what about the revolution and all that it promised? Is that falling apart too? Dr. Eliana Valdez studied 9 years to become a respected immunologist. She makes one of the highest salaries in Cuba, 440 pesos. Yet, like many professionals employed by the state, she says it's not enough to get by.
When I was younger, everyone was more equal. Now I see that there are more social differences. People that can't afford things, people who can.
Those who can are people like Ivan Rodriguez, once a state transportation expert, now a member of a small class of self-employed Cubans. In this case, a fruit vendor.
At least now I can meet the basic needs of my family. My standard of living has improved.
It's been 7 years now since Cuba entered the so-called special period, which began when the Soviet Union collapsed, nearly taking Cuba's subsidized economy with it. The special period means Cuba must now survive on tourism, overseas investment, and the US dollar, sent in mainly by relatives living in the United States. Those who have dollars or can afford to buy them can acquire almost anything. Those who don't must survive on their ration cards, which no longer provide enough to eat.
You get a ration of chicken 4 times a year, of beef, ground meat, and protein paste also 4 times a year.
At the farmer's market, you can get all the pork you want, but at prices most Cubans can't afford. The socialist promise of total equality and lifetime employment that generations of Cubans grew up with is floundering. Corruption in the workplace is now commonplace, as many Cubans steal everything from cement to nails to paint to resell on the black market. And the more Washington increases the economic pressure on the communist government, the more it puts the squeeze on opponents who want a Western-style democracy. In the last year, scores of dissidents have been imprisoned. And despite their denials, the government insists it knows for sure they're in the pay of the USA.
There is no one of those so-called dissident groups in which at least one member is not a member of our own security.
For the majority that doesn't defy the revolution, there's disillusionment and unsettling questions about where a system that once carried Cubans from the cradle to the grave is taking them. One man largely responsible for trying to cure Cuba's ills is Vice President Carlos Laje. In a rare interview, we asked Mr. Laje if there wasn't a contradiction between the socialist principles he defends and the economic changes he has introduced.
We believe we are not moving more and more towards a capitalist system. I think we are moving towards a more open system, a system which is more modern, more in tandem with the circumstances of the world. These things create inequalities. But in the context of an economy that is predominantly socialist, these inequalities do not reach the extreme and humiliating levels found elsewhere.
So you recognize that within these transformations, you have created a system where not everyone is alike.
Yes, we recognize that. We cannot have the level of social equality today that we had before we started this transformation.
For almost 4 decades, the Cuban government has blamed the U.S. economic embargo for almost all of the problems of this country. When will your government take responsibility for the shortcomings inherent in your own economic system?
We are always pointing to the difficulties of our efficiency of our economy, and we recognize our inefficiency problems. However, we believe that we are moving towards a solution for these problems. For example, our tobacco production. You'll find that our export production 2 years ago was less than 10%. At present, it's more than 30%.
Mr. Vice President, will the Fifth Party Congress produce any changes in the direction of the Cuban Revolution?
No. No. Neither the Fifth, nor the Fourth, nor the Third, the Second, or First, or the Sixth, Seventh, or Eighth. The course is the course of socialist development in the country. I think that party congresses have certain significance, not because they change the course, but because it's time for analysis.
While Cuba admits it must put its own house in order, it's undeniable that the U.S. economic embargo has taken its toll in many areas, including the supply of food and medicine. At this hospital, which specializes in heart surgery for children, the director struggles to obtain a life-saving drug produced in the United States.
Our country needs 200 or 300 doses of this drug a year, and we have a hard time buying it from the U.S. So we have to buy it in third countries at 3 or 4 times its original cost.
The problem doctors face is reflected in 2 studies conducted by the American Association for World Health and South Florida University. Both conclude the U.S. economic embargo has an impact on Cuba's health by restricting sales of food and medicine to the country. The studies argue drugs and equipment like this oxygen tent are in short supply because of U.S. legislation. It calls for U.S. pharmaceutical companies and their overseas subsidiaries to obtain a special license to sell to Cuba. Sale of food by U.S. corporations is also banned, which the study says contributes to malnutrition. Washington defends its policy, saying the Cuban government and its failing economic system is responsible for the decline in health. Even though U.S. companies are allowed to sell directly to Cuba after obtaining a special license, experts say the cumbersome requirements are a deterrent. The U.S. Congress is debating ways to make it less difficult to send food and medicine to Cuba. But there is opposition to this. When we return, we'll go to Miami to hear from some of the staunchest opponents of communist Cuba.
They are more than 3,000 strong, the greatest names in business today, united in a mission to reach ever-increasing heights of success. For these world leaders, one marketplace is integral to their success, entrusted with the hopes and dreams of business and investors alike. The New York Stock Exchange, a proud part of what makes this country tick.
Only 90 miles of water separate Cuba from Florida, but the political gulf keeps them worlds apart. CNN's Miami bureau chief, John Zarrella, takes us to a community of passionate and influential Cubans who dream of a Cuba without Fidel Castro.
In Miami, Cuba often takes center stage. In this case, a concert by a Cuban musician isn't just about music. It is about politics.
Aren't you ashamed to spend money and give it to this guy who's going to take it to a dictator?
It is a passion which has burned for nearly 40 years.
Havana's ovation for Fidel Castro himself had been long deferred.
Castro gained power by preaching democratic principles, but turned to a socialist and communist style of government.
There are already 95,000 Cuban refugees in Florida, those who fled in the dark of night before Castro's turnabout.
Some fled facing imprisonment.
I was afraid that they could put me locked in jail.
Some faced execution. Property was confiscated. Many Cubans left with nothing but their feelings and started over in Miami.
They feel the passion to try to help Cuba be free. That's something that's unique in this exile, sociologically, exile community.
Cuban Americans have become one of the most rapidly successful immigrant groups in U.S. history, touting leaders in business and politics, members of Congress, mayors, university and corporation presidents. The most outspoken are predominantly hardline, and they express their feelings. Tough talk fills the airwaves, and any news that is bad for Castro is sought after here.
Desde La Habana, que el gobernante cubano Fidel Castro...
You will find that most of the media here is hardline, but that is the thinking of the majority of the people. And I guess what they say is that the voice of the people is the voice of God.
The most prominent anti-Castro group, the Cuban American National Foundation, modeled itself after the powerful Jewish American lobby. It is well organized, focused, and doggedly persistent.
It's by concentrating like a laser beam on that Cuba policy that the groups have been able to leverage their power.
Concerned that the Clinton administration was becoming more open to Castro's Cuba, they focused on members of Congress to cut off Cuba even further. In the past 5 years, Congress tightened the trade embargo twice, most recently after Cuba shot down 2 Brothers to the Rescue airplanes. Daily, the community watches for the latest move between the U.S. and Cuba. And for many who experienced the revolution firsthand, they wait, as they have for almost 40 years, for yet another revolution. John Zarrella, CNN, Miami.
A common rallying cry in Miami is Cuba sí, Castro no. But it's not that simple. When we return, we'll take you to the center of Cuba, where you'll see that the revolution is about more than Fidel Castro.
For nearly 50 years, we at Neuberger and Berman have been managing our mutual funds carefully and wisely. Certainly, when it comes to investing, it can be tempting to rush into things, but we always assess the risk involved. And in the long run, patience has its advantages. Another good reason our principals and employees have over $100 million in the funds we manage. Neuberger and Berman Funds.
Dear Jeff, you know how I'm always looking for helpful information on investing. Well, Neuberger and Berman just sent me their 10 secrets every mutual fund investor should know. Free. Even I learned a few things. Thought you would too, especially now that you're saving for the baby's college education. Get a copy. Call 1-800-383-FUND. And hey, give Mom and me a call sometime too. Love, Dad.
Welcome back. You're looking at a monument to Che Guevara in the city of Santa Clara, 3 hours east of Havana. It's here that Che led his rebels in a decisive battle that led to the overthrow of the Batista government. For the first time, you can see the inside of the mausoleum where Che's remains will be put to rest next week in an elaborate official ceremony. While this will be his final resting place, the memorial is meant to serve as a reminder of the ideals for which he stood. Ideals that, as CNN's Larry Woods discovered, are still very much a part of life in the heartland of Cuba.
The daily dance of commerce and life resonates throughout the countryside of Cuba. Yeah! But for some, the steps come slower. Along the streets of Camagüey, under the brooding likeness of the man they called Che, a stream of humanity winds its way to work on a humid Caribbean morning. Even 30 years after his death, the ideological imprint left by Ernesto Che Guevara is still engraved on the Cuban psyche. From campesinos who toil the fields throughout the province to young people who are edging their way up the economic ladder, Che carries mystical clout.
He was a hero. It's a shame that he is not alive at this moment. He could be an example for everybody right now.
Old-timers like to say that Che subscribed to a conscientious work ethic. And today, in a nation targeted by its U.S. neighbor with a 3 decades-old embargo, in coping with food rations, medical shortages, and the simplest of necessities, even the school children fit into the labor pool. Geography teacher Esther Garcia said it was their way of contributing what little they could.
We in Cuba educate our children in the love of work. They know they are helping feed the people.
And the people who have been anchored to the rich, lush llano for generations are doing what they can to endure the hardships of agrarian life. Example, on a good day, Leslie Cruz may earn 30 pesos, about $1.25 in the United States, cleaning and refilling disposable cigarette lighters. Others cart fresh-baked bread to nearby eateries. Horse-drawn taxis roam the country roads in search of paying customers. 60-year-old Philadelphio Alfonso and his wife Clara, who manage a goat farm, represent a work ethic they say comes from a long devotion to Che and Fidel and everything revolutionary.
Since the beginning of the 26th of July movement, I was a rebel sympathizer and sold bonds. And I've always loved the revolution.
Had it not been for the revolution, which produced the highest literacy rate in the world, Alfonso likely would never have learned to read or write. His confidence in Castro to guide Cuba during the nation's 5th Congress is fixed. On Alfonso's goat farm, Luvixa Ferrario, 26, a veterinarian and mother of a 2-year-old, is typical of the estimated 50% of the population who were born after the revolution and still find its philosophy acceptable. Why, I ask?
Because of the things we have lived through and the things we have endured, this is our thing, and we defend it.
While she remains a loyal Fidelista, like many of her generation raised on party rhetoric, there is room for skepticism.
I have no doubts that the revolution will survive, but I have doubts about if there will be changes.
In the remote village of Quang Tri, named in honor of Ho Chi Minh, by the way, revolutionary zeal is found in a small clinic where Dr. Senaro Miro is currently battling a near epidemic of conjunctivitis, a painful eye infection. There is limited medicine to treat the disease, but at least they have a clinic. Before Che and Castro, they did not. Collectively, they are believers.
This has been transmitted generation by generation, and they try to fight to keep the values, no matter what the shortages.
Whether it be in the syncopated play of little girls catching the spirit at a youth carnival in Siboney, or late-night denizens of a saucy disco club on the outskirts of Camagüey, Cubans far removed from Havana are setting their own tempo for survival and allegiance. Former teacher Eduardo Sosa, now in the hotel business, represents a shifting of economic and political thinking among new entrepreneurs.
Sugar cane is not the solution anymore, okay? We all Cubans know that, tourism is a thing we need right now.
You still believe in the tenets of communism?
I believe in Cuban socialism.
But what if the dream of Che Guevara and Fidel Castro fails to materialize in his lifetime? What then?
We'll find another solution.
Assessing the revolution some years ago, a Cuban once said, "We traded our dreams of a democratic system for a guaranteed bowl of socialist soup." Well, it appears here in the heartland, the people are willing to live with that bowl of soup, so long as they can cling to the dreams of their revolutionary heroes. Larry Woods, CNN, Camagüey, Cuba.
Can those dreams survive, or are they destined to evolve? Whatever the answer, Che remains the eternal idealist, while Fidel Castro remains firmly in charge of his socialist ship, trying against the odds to keep it on its revolutionary course. The outcome of this week's Communist Party Congress could have a big impact on Cuba. But regardless of the decisions taken, time and current events seem to be sweeping this country in a new direction. In just over 3 months, Pope John Paul II is due to visit this island nation. What he sees and says will add yet another dimension to this multifaceted story. Cuba has been described by some as an island in more than just geography. It stands alone as the last communist bastion in the Western Hemisphere. Will that change? Will the United States finally bring the regime to its knees? Or will Fidel Castro or his successors continue in their ways, defiant of the superpower just 90 miles away? History has shown that guessing developments in Cuba is a futile exercise. But what is safe to say is that Cuba is a nation struggling with its identity. When the picture becomes clear, so too will the fate of the revolution. Thank you for being with us. I'm Lucia Newman in Santa Clara.
Closed captioning was provided by Bell Atlantic, the heart of communication.
Tonight, in the crossfire, Harold Ickey's under fire at the Senate fundraising hearings. How did he handle the questioning? Tonight, 7:30 Eastern on CNN.